as you've heard his heartfelt thoughts towards our constituent services and how we provide that best. And I want to thank him for that. He's been a tremendous advocate for staff here on the Hill and those that work in our offices and beyond, and done a tremendous job, and he'll always be known for that. We do have some fiscal challenges and constraints that we're trying to operate within, and I know that he did some great research to try to find an offset, but as a committee, we've really deeply looked at all the various components that make this bill, and it's really hard to find those extra dollars at this moment. I will point out, though, that the leadership recently, as you probably are aware, found a 1% increase, or allocated a 1% increase to all MRAs from unspent MRA funds from the previous year. So that's a good step forward in the right direction. We want to continue that conversation moving forward and try to find some ways that we can provide additional resources, but this time I'd have to oppose the gentleman's amendment, not because of the gentleman himself, but just because the constraints were within.
Mr. Eppersberger.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I support my friend Sam Farr's amendment. I think that when you look at what our role is in Congress, we have the legislative role, and then we have the service role. We support our constituents, and we do it well, and if we don't, we probably won't be here. Anyone who has been in management in business will tell you, you're only as good as your team. And I think the same thing with all of our congressional staff. You're only as good as your team. And I think it's really unwise for us not to look after our staff. Politically, we're not taking a raise, so we're not going to get hit on this. In fact, our constituents who have been serviced by our staff, who are overworked all the time. And if we don't deal with this issue, it's wise, it's the right thing to do, and it's something that will make us better, because if we don't, we keep losing staff. We have less people who have experience, who know what to do, how to service our constituents. So I would hope that we could consider this as a fiscal responsibility issue, taking care of your team. We're not talking about just a raise. We're talking about the body itself and making us strong. And when you represent over 700,000 people and you're not going to take care of your staff, I think that's unwise management. So I'd really I would really ask that we can reconsider your amendment, or consider your amendment, and that the majority reconsider this very important issue. I think this has to do with the core of what we do in Congress. I yield back.
Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of Mr. Farr's amendment. The Farr amendment seeks to add $8.3 million, a 1.5% increase to our members' representational allowance. All members should be sympathetic to the Farr amendment, and I would venture to guess that the majority of us were prepared for this very hearing by our intrepid staff, arguably who have suffered the most from the cuts that we have endured. It is in both parties' interests to ensure that the House functions at the highest levels so we can attract and retain the best and brightest talent. We must leave this institution better than we found it. That's our responsibility on this full committee. With this in mind, it's important to note that we've provided the Capitol Police, for example, with 13% budget increases over the past 2 years, but have provided the House with a 0% increase over the same period. In 2013, legislative assistants were being paid $6,000 less than they were in 2009 when adjusted for inflation, and I can only imagine how much worse these numbers are 3 years later. In case we've forgotten how difficult it is to survive when you're just starting out, because almost no one here is just starting out, so we're well past that. Let me take you down for a walk down memory lane. A median-priced one-bedroom in the D.C. area costs $2,000 per month. You add first, last, and security, and after paying for rent and eating in the house cafeterias, which is no cheap effort either, we're lucky we can keep anyone on staff. We cannot carry out our constitutional duties with such a misguided sense of priorities. Mr. Chairman, I support the Farr amendment. We kind of have to stop the madness here. I know that it is, politically safe to not give our own office budgets an increase, but we have now recovered economically. With 74 straight months of job growth, we have come out of the Great Recession, and it is time to make sure that we're able to have budgets in our congressional offices that meet the needs of our constituents and that support our staff and ensure that they can be paid a wage that is competitive. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to support Mr. Farr's amendment. When you look at it, there's been a 20% decrease in MRA over our last 5 years. That's an average of $300,000 Steadily declining and presently frozen MRAs have negative impacts on our ability to do our jobs. Just last week, it was reported that the average length of service on Capitol Hill for a staffer is 2 years. So basically, when they learn their job, they leave for a better job. The average member's district has seen its population increase by 31,000, almost 32,000 people. That's 31,000 new constituents per member spread over a smaller staff. Furthermore, since Obama took office in 2009 through 2014, his administration has issued roughly 150,000 pages of new rules enacted by this White House. That's more paperwork, more regulations, and more staff work by our teams to deal with a bigger and more complicated government. There is certainly a correlation between declining MRAs, staff number, and staff tenure and providing our positive results to our constituents. Now, the offset here comes from the architect of the Capitol's capital construction and operations account. And cutting funds from one agency to give to another agency isn't ideal. And I understand this might slow some projects down, such as the Cannon renovation, by a year or so. However, I don't see the point in renovating our offices when we can't even afford to keep them properly staffed. We need to incentivize staff to stay longer and work harder so that we can best serve the people who sent us up here. Therefore, I encourage my colleagues to support Mr. Farr's amendment. And by the way, the Senate nor this president has cut their budgets in the past 5 years. I yield back.
Mr. Serrano.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I wish I could tell you that when I walk down the hallways here or when I'm in my district, people stop me and say, you know, Congressman Serrano, you're the greatest congressman in the history of this country. But usually what I hear is, you know, I went to your office and they were wonderful. Where were you? I said, I was in Washington. I said, oh, that's okay. They were great. And here I hear, you know, I met with so-and-so in your office and they told me straight what they could do, what they couldn't do. You know what I'm talking about, because this is probably one of the few issues where we all have the same experience. The people who work for us are, for the most part, people who are very young. If America knew, and I've often wondered about this, how young the people who run this country are, and I'm not talking about us, you know, they would have new hope as to what is happening in our country, because these young people, when they leave, they don't leave because they don't like their jobs. They don't leave because they don't want to help their country. They don't leave because they don't like working for an appropriator. That's a big privilege. They leave because someone is dangling a job paying 2-3 times. We're not going to compete with that, but not to give them a small raise every year. Okay, do we deserve a raise? Well, when you have 27 millionaires called the Yankees in your district, I'll argue that I deserve a raise, but forget about that. I'm having a better year than they are. So we've decided we're not giving ourselves a raise. That's fine. But our staffs are different. Our staffs are an example. They're a representation of us, and we're all proud of them. And as I look across at all of you, you want to shake your heads in agreement, but there are political considerations. But I wish we can break them the way the gentleman just did and say, I will vote for the Farr Amendment, because in doing so, we're showing respect for the people who serve the people who send us here. There can't be a better combination. Thank you.
Mr. Ryan.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. Just would like to say that obviously service and how we can service our constituents, and I commend the gentleman from Mississippi for standing up and advocating for this amendment, because I've been here 14 years and I've seen a real erosion of our ability to service our constituents. And just in my office alone, I think we've seen 3 or 4 staffers that we've had to, as they moved on, we never replaced. And the real concern I have here, having come a few years back, not nearly as long as some of you have been here, but to see the Dave Obies and the Jack Murthas and the chairmans of the world be here and really maintain and retain a lot of the institutional knowledge that we had in this institution and that we've lost in this institution. And they were always accompanied by staff members who had been here almost as long as they had. Chairs of the committee, subcommittee chairs, but also staff in the offices. And I think we're getting close as the world's getting more complicated, as we just went through with the defense bill. The complexities of the world, our intelligence apparatus, our security apparatus, education, entitlements, and all the rest. If we don't start maintaining, not that we don't have great staff now, but the incentives to leave are so great and the pressures to leave are so great, and we're never going to pay what the private sector pays, but we need to start thinking about more than just the next election, not just for ourselves, but for this institution. And if we don't start in this committee, I think, protecting the integrity of this committee and this institution, that we're going to continue to get run roughshod by the executive branch. Because they're going to be able to bring people in and have a level of power that we forgot about. And I watched, you may not have liked it, but I watched Dave Obey and Jack Murtha and others who ran this committee, both Democrats and Republicans, who, them and their staffers, knew more than the bureaucrats knew in the executive branch, knew more than others knew in agencies, and were able to go toe-to-toe with them because of the knowledge they had about the institution and how investments were made and decisions were made on the Hill. So I'm supporting this amendment because I think it's important for us to take a stand as the appropriators to say that the Congress is important, Article 1 is important, what we stand for is important, and we're Article 1. The Congress is, and we've got to start treating our staff with respect and the kind of appreciation that they deserve. And so I rise in support of this amendment, and I hope we see it in a bigger context, not just the constituent services, which are so important. While budgets have gone down, constituent numbers have gone up for many of us, and we're still trying to service our constituents on the ground. But think about this institution and what we need to do to drive democracy in the legislative process here in our own country.
Mr. Israel.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to very strongly support this amendment. 2 weeks ago in my district on Long Island in New York, I attended an event to provide long overdue recognition to Vietnam War veterans. The Northport VA Hospital expected 250 Vietnam veterans to show up. 1,500 showed up. And I went through what I know that all of my colleagues on this committee enjoy. And that is a steady stream of people approaching and saying, Congressman, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm neither, but your office got me a retroactive payment. Your office got me a medal that I'd been denied for decades. When I called your office, they dropped everything and they took care of me. And I may agree with you, Mr. Israel, I may disagree, or as we say on Long Island, I may agree with you, Mr. Israel, I may disagree with you, Mr. Israel, but your office showed me what your priorities are and that you take care of us. Now, I didn't make the calls to the VA. I didn't process the paperwork or the files. My casework staff did that. My veterans casework staff did that. They were, everybody on staff is valuable, everybody, including the people here who, at the very last minute, Mr. Chairman, made that manager's amendment a little warmer. They all work hard. For me, the people in my district office who work hard every single day without regard to politics or policy, but just making sure that the people I represent are taken care of, they deserve some incentives. I want to keep them doing their job they're doing. I want to keep them dedicated. And the way to do that is to give them what so many other people get in politics and in the private sector, the recognition that they deserve and additional compensation. So on behalf of those people, I very strongly support this amendment.
Judge Carter.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of Mr. Farr's amendment.
All right, Sam, you're going to win this one, Sam.
You know, I've got Fort Hood in my district. We range from 52,000 soldiers to right now around 39,000 soldiers. In the United States Army, almost every soldier in the heavy army passes through Fort